Hi friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and today's video is, I guess, a little bit of a personal one, but I also thought it might be interesting for some of you to see it, because essentially this video will be comparing two tarot decks based on the deck of Atea. This one is a Spanish deck, which I received from Mexico, although I thought I was ordering it from Spain. But as it turns out, it arrived from Mexico. And I guess El Supremo Arte de Echar las Cartas means, I think, the best way or the first way to hear or understand the cards, and they're referencing tarot cards, and it has a tarot or Egyptian narrative, right, that many of the occultist decks had. And then as soon as I opened it, it really was very reminiscent of the Atea deck. So I have two Atea decks. I have three, but the third one is a copy of this one from the 60s, and this one's from Lo Scarabeo, which in essence it's the same deck. The only difference is it's got a different box and a different name. I think the other one was called the Ancient Tarot, the Egyptian Gypsies Tarot, or something like that, which I no longer have the box because I got it in excuse me, I got it so many years ago when I wasn't concerned about saving boxes. But at any rate, the only difference between the imagery on that and this deck is that this one has a box, whereas my other one is in a bag. And the cards themselves, my Grimoire decks have like a white background, and the Lo Scarabeo is more cream, or at any rate. So I'm using this one as reference, and also the Thoth deck from, I guess, 1870s. Now, the reason I have any interest in these decks to do a video is because I've been on a personal quest with my ancestry. I can only get so far. And, I had mentioned before in other videos, and maybe even in some of my blogs, that I had been reading the cards probably for 20 or 25 years before my father told me that his grandmother on the Spanish side, my father is Italian, half Spanish, and my mother's, is strictly from is strictly from Italy. At any rate, it was the Spanish great-grandmother who read the tarot cards, which I thought was interesting, since the history of tarot really comes from Italy, where I would have had a greater chance of having an ancestor read tarot cards. Now, that's not to say I didn't really have an Italian ancestor, or a few who didn't read the tarot cards, because that's probably true in the course of, the antiquity of my lineage, right? But in recent years, I know that I had a great-grandmother who read the tarot cards. Now, she was from Spain, as my father's, father was from Spain, and so she was Spanish. I also know that she lived a very marginal life, whereas my mother's ancestry is more refined and erudite group of people. I know that my great-grandmother was from a rough and tumble world, and she never married my grandfather. And my father's turning in his grave if I'm telling family secrets like this, because it was something that was a disgrace to them, but my great-grandmother was a maid to a wealthy family. Classic story. I don't know the circumstances, but she became pregnant, and she had my grandfather, and she was unmarried. However, he supported her until he died, but he died, unfortunately, at quite a young age, at age 34, and left my great-grandmother with a child and no support from his family, who didn't care. So I don't know if there was a love with them. I know they were certainly never married, so I don't know, like, if it was obligation that he took care of her or if it was that he really loved her. But at any rate, after he died, his family cut the ties. Now, she bothered to name my grandfather with his name, so there was some pride, I think, in who his father was. And then when my father was born, they gave him the same name. And then when my brother was born, the oldest of my brothers was born, they gave him that name. So there's a strong tie to that lineage, and a certain amount of pride in in the name of the father, right? But my great grandmother, who had the baby, from any kind of sources that I look up and find of her, she had a rough life. In fact, when she comes to the United States, the last I can see is that she came over on a voyage without her son, who was left with friends of the wealthy family to raise him because she was destitute. I think she bought the bill of goods that she was going to come to this country, and the streets were paved with gold, and that she would get her son. But what happened was, when she got here, the roads weren't paved with gold. She spoke Spanish. She didn't speak English, and her life was marginal at best. She came over as a maid to a wealthy family who was in the Algonquin Hotel, or was it the other hotel that begins with an A? I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was one of the fancy hotels that began with an A in New York, Astoria. Maybe the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. But at any rate, she was a maid for them, and then after that, I don't know what happened to her. So I'd always like to know. But at any rate, in an effort to connect with her, I thought, well, I'd like to know what deck she might have been using. I know she was born in 1884. And so I researched, and I found that a Spanish deck that came out in the late 1800s was the deck of Dr. Moorne. However, the thing about it is, it doesn't say if it was from Spain, if it was if a deck that came from Spain or not. The one that I have was made in Mexico in 75. So I don't know. I don't know the history of this. I looked it up in my 4 volumes of Stuart Kaplan's book, and there's just a brief little paragraph with a few photographs in volume 1 saying that it was roughly based on the Ataya of the late 1800s. It doesn't tell me the country of origin where it was created, because I don't think Spain was really known for tarot decks, but they may have had some, and I don't rightly know if my great-grandmother, I'll call her Josepha because that was her name, I don't know if Josepha used this deck, or if she used the Spanish playing cards, which would have made sense, because sometimes the Spanish playing cards are called tarot cards also, but they're just Spanish playing cards. So I don't know. I don't know if I have any connection with my great-grandmother through this deck or not. Now, the one thing I do know is that I probably will never use it myself, because my soul or my spirit or my innards just jibes completely with the Italian tarot decks, and by extension some of the French and the Swiss and Belgium decks also. When I did my DNA really came out 78% Italian, 13% Iberian Peninsula, which would have been my great-grandmother and the man she partnered with. But, some of that was Portuguese and some of that was Spanish. And then a handful, the remaining 9% is from Scotland, and then the 5% is from Greece. So, my DNA, I guess, reaches for the Italian decks because that's what I'm simpatico with. It's on some level, I really physically respond to the Italian decks because that's what I understand. But I'm always trying to improve myself and become more familiar with things and study, different branches of tarot because it's all very interesting. Okay, so with this deck, it came with this card. It came with no instruction of what I was looking at or who Dr. Moorne was. And in fact, I've tried to find anything about Dr. Moorne, and I found nothing. That was in English. Nothing, so I don't know. But I did pull like the two Ataya decks that I had to see which one it most resembled, and it does seem to resemble the Book of Thoth, the Ataya, what's it called? It's called specifically the Book of Thoth, Ataya Tarot. Now, it's interesting because they do have, they share in common this, image from the Book of Thoth. But then in addition to the Book of Thoth, we have Kabbalistic letters. We have what appears to be hieroglyphic letters. There is this, the sense of this is the correct side. And that this is the reverse side. And we do see that in reversed, it's the querent or the person asking the question. And that's it. So we have an interpretive word of chaos and then nothing, nothingness maybe. And you'll see, before I go too far, I've only pulled, maybe the first dozen cards from the Egyptian Gypsies tarot deck. And they don't really seem to share much in common. It's much more, it shares much more in common with this deck than this deck. So I'm probably not going to continue showing any cards from there. So, if anybody out there can help me, because I haven't spoken conversational Spanish since I was 14 years old. I retain words and I can read it, better than I can hear it and understand it. So when I find videos on this deck, it's all in Spanish. And I don't know if this could have been a deck that my great-grandmother would have been using. The timing is about right. But I just don't know. If it would have been this deck, because as I said, I thought I was ordering it from Spain, but it arrived from Mexico, so I don't know. But you can see that, it takes the Ataya image and puts it in this portion of the card. And then it adds the Hebrew letter. And then there's a hieroglyph. So it's very interesting. It's really very interesting. But like I said, I'm personally not drawn to use it. This isn't like, I know you might laugh at me for saying my DNA is drawn to the Italian decks, but it really is. That's where my sensibilities, like who I am, what I respond to, what I gravitate toward is more toward the Italian Swiss decks than it is to those with, an Egyptian narrative or the Kabbalistic, references. But certainly for those of you who are interested in you know, occultist decks and the Atea in particular. If you're not familiar with the tarot of Dr. Moorne, I thought it might be fun for you to see it, especially with English, because I don't understand. I can't follow. I can't understand. The Spanish. The Spanish. I pick up words here and there, but and I don't know if there's a book in Spanish. I thought it was in French for this deck. I might have a chance if there's a book in Spanish. Now, the thing about the Atea deck over here is that I believe that the numbered cards have the same names. It's just that the images are different, and this one clearly is following this tradition. So, in the first few cards, and I guess that's true of the Atea, it almost looks like in the beginning there was, chaos, and then let there be light, and let there be, growth on the planet, and, the heavens, and maybe man, I mean, I might be reading more into it than there is, but the classic image of Prudence with a snake and a mirror. And then, of course, reversals, had the reverse side had, a different meaning. And, the Atea cards, put them in there. Sorry. This is why sometimes, my cards get confused. And I have to go looking through decks to find I accidentally put one card in one deck. I'm constantly checking to make sure I have all my cards for all my decks, because when I do so many videos, sometimes I inadvertently will put a card in a certain deck that it doesn't belong to. So that looks like the embalmers. Wow. I don't know if the hieroglyphs are authentic hieroglyphs or just made to look like hieroglyphs, but they're interesting too. So there's the hermit with, in this case, he's got a dog and a lantern. Here he does not have the lantern, but he has the dog. Interesting. And, with the reference to a church, then it's like he's a monk. Or I don't know if that's a church because there's no cross on the steeple. So I don't know. That might have just been an assumption on my part, although it does kind of look like a church. But without the steeple, it probably is not. But like I said, if anybody can tell me anything about the tarot of Dr. Moorne, and if it was from the Iberian Peninsula or not, that would be like, I would, be very interested to know. Because I would like to know if Josepha read with this deck, But certainly if it was from Mexico, she never would have. She never probably would have. And it probably then would have been that she was reading, Spanish cards, just Spanish playing cards. And my father may have thought that they were tarot cards. So, the deck of Moorne references the Atea, references, I guess, a poker deck, references the Spanish deck, and then has hieroglyphics as well as, Kabbalistic letters, or the Hebrew letters. But with the court cards, at least, they are referencing the Spanish playing card deck and the, I guess, the modern French playing cards that we've adopted here in this United States. So, I wonder too sometimes, why isn't just this image enough? Why isn't 10 of batons enough to interpret the card? Why do we have to have the 10 of diamonds? Why do we have to have the Spanish 10 of clubs, and the hieroglyph, or anything in addition to 8 batons? I don't, I guess that's my I don't understand why the additional embellishments are required. If they all mean the same thing, then if you know what 8 batons means, or 10 batons, or whatever we're looking at, then you know what the card means. And, they have, they have like a keyword, like being slow or slow down, something like that. I don't speak French, right? Retard. I guess that means like to be slow, or like something that's a slower process, maybe. So they even have keywords. So I guess then the Hebrew alphabet obviously would only be would only be on the triumph cards, or the trump cards, or in the occult language they would be called the major arcana. Okay, duh. Okay, that makes sense. So that when we get to the pip cards, there's no more reference, and the reference goes to other playing cards with retention of hieroglyph. So this deck that I received from Mexico, the opening card says it's from 1975, but it clearly is a newer deck. I mean, I don't think anybody even used this deck. It feels brand new. There was no booklet or anything with it. There's nothing about it to give me any information about where it came from or what it's about. So you see, they did really, try to reference this 1870 deck. And I don't know if Mexico adopted the Spanish playing cards. I do know when I lived in Spain as a girl, I'm very familiar with the Spanish playing cards and what they look like. And I'm sure they originated in Spain because the Spanish are a very proud people, and they would have had their own deck. It's hard to explain, but that's what I know about the Spanish people from living there. Very proud people. And they would have had their own cards for sure. So I don't know if then this would have been developed in Spain, or because they are referencing Spanish playing cards, unless the folks in Mexico also played with Spanish playing cards if they were exported from Spain. And I don't know. I've been trying really hard to find information on the tarot of Dr. Moorne online. Anything I found was in Spanish. Anything written, any websites were in Spanish, any videos were in Spanish. So I'm just not proficient enough anymore to be able to to understand. I wouldn't mind translating a book if there was one in Spanish, because I can read better than I can, I can speak, but I speak slowly, And when it comes to listening to the Spanish language, unless I'm in Spain, I really have a hard time. I really have a hard time understanding like South American Spanish and Mexican or Puerto Rican. My exposure was Castilian Spanish. So even now in the region where my family's from, La Coruña, is now called A Coruña, and it's gone back to its Galician heritage. That's where my people were from the extreme northwest corner of Spain. It used to be called La Coruña. Now it's called A Coruña. And it's my favorite city on earth. It has, I don't know, it has a deep pull for me. I wouldn't mind my ashes being scattered there, except I don't want to be cremated. But if I had to be cremated, then if that had to be the case, then put my ashes over in A Coruña and I'd be okay. But it was like a magical place for me and a magical period of my life. And even though it only represents like 13% of my DNA, and I've been to Italy, which is incredible, but there was just something about that magical period of my life. Although that's got nothing to do with these cards. So I'm just going through the cards one by one now, just for those of you who might interest to see them. Yeah, I think I don't have these like in the right order, like the same. I don't have them matching, so I apologize for that. But their words in French are the same. And, depending on the direction. So from this point forward, I'll try to make them the same. It's interesting. I think esperanza, I think that means hope. I think. Lost. Perdida, I think, means lost. Soledad means alone, maybe loneliness, maybe. I'm not sure how they would have interpreted these cards. And we do owe a lot to the occultists because, a lot of their interpretations cross over, I think, to many of us. And also, if there's any truth to the story that Atea learned the art of tarot reading from an Italian, right? Whether it was an Italian woman or an Italian man, I don't know. But that he learned the art of interpreting tarot cards from the Piedmont region of Italy, then it makes sense that, the definitions that the occultists got came from Italy. Some of their meanings are based upon what came from Italy. So, the fact that they overlap today, I don't think should come as a surprise, and I don't think anybody needs to apologize for, having some, definitions for a card that seems to come from the occultists because, well, the occultists themselves admit that it came from Italy. Their understanding of the way Atea learned the cards was from an Italian in the Piedmont region of Italy. And even though there's not a whole lot of documentation that says, I don't know if there's too much at all, that says there were Italian cartomancers, there were, right? Atea is given credit for being the very first person, the professional tarot reader, and I'm not taking that away from him, but there's no way you're going to tell me that, little old lady witches in Italy, in remote regions, especially in the South, where, they weren't maybe as sophisticated, no one's going to tell me that they weren't interpreting the cards, come on. So, I think that the cards have been interpreted since as long as they were created, and may have been created as part of the card game of creating stories from the cards that might have been left in their hand. Who's to say that that's not what happened? That's just my 2 cents. I think I read somewhere, I don't know where my source is, but I do recall learning that, with the remaining cards in a hand, that they told stories. They just made poems up about, what was left in their hands or their opponent's hands. And you can see that happening very clearly. The nature of tarot, the images on the cards, it's just a stone's throw away from being an interpretive vehicle. So I hope those of you who stayed here this long found that interesting. You never know what I'm going to say, how far into anything. Sometimes I get these lucid moments, where I say something that might be helpful. So there it is. The Tarot of Dr. Moorne. Let's see, I'll show you the backs. Maybe that will help some of you know where I got it, where it came from. So it says Gomez, HNOS, Editores, but this is definitely a Mexican publishing house because it says so right on the box. No, not there. It doesn't. Maybe it says it. Oh, it says it on one of these cards. That's where it says it. Mexico. Exclusively produced, distributed in Mexico, 1975. Okay, friends, until next time, peace and stay well.